Hi, welcome to this broadcast. We've been covering the case of missing 15-year-old Sebastian Rogers. And joining me today is with Lauren Conlon. Have Lauren introduce herself.
Hi, thanks, Peter. So I'm Lauren Conlon. I've been covering the Sebastian Rogers case on my podcast, The Outlier, as well as another podcast I host, Corruption, What Happened to Grant Solomon, as Grant Solomon passed away in the same county that Sebastian did, Sumner County. So I joined Nancy Grace twice to discuss my findings on this case, and it's really been bugging me for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, I'm with everybody else here in the sense that something is just not right. So, Peter, I will let you take it away.
Okay, I think that people, their emotional response to the case is not simply because there's a 15-year-old boy missing and then add that to someone with special needs who's more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But I think, and I said this previously, that the promotion of the case in terms of getting people to know Sebastian's name and face, I give the stepfather credit in a strange way, because he is so provocative and he makes people so angry that they tune in. And
Right.
So I'd like to separate some of the thoughts there, and I have some notes up on the screen that I wanted to cover.
Okay.
So basically, this is going to be about who called the police to report Sebastian Rogers missing. And this is something very important to consider. And hopefully we'll be able to take some of your questions there. It's a little tricky at times, but recap. And this is strictly my perspective based on the language. I'm not always right. And there are a lot of other ideas and theories that I like to hear. I think any analysis should have the holes punched in it as best they can. Years ago, I worked on specifically identifying the language of active addiction. And this was predominantly for employment analysis, but useful, obviously, in criminal analysis. And just as I was ready to present this and take it, basically around the country, and hopefully have psychologists, social workers, law enforcement, others punch as many holes in it as they can, because what would remain would be great.
Yeah.
But we need that type of disagreement. We need it to other viewpoints. And with COVID, a lot of departments shut down. They were no longer doing things in person. Since then, I've been able to get more and more feedback on it, and it's made the teaching on it stronger. So it's always good to have those different of opinion.
Right, absolutely.
So here's my initial thoughts on the interview. 15-year-old boy with special needs is reported missing. Okay. The special needs, with my background in child protective, for example, the years I did with that, and then later on with criminal, is a red flag. Just right off the bat, special needs, difficult household. What we then look for is what kind of support, what kind of relationships does he have, that sort of thing. Then you add in stepfather, and that increases the odds of a very difficult situation in which a child is missing.
Right.
Just basic data.
Right.
Then for the first week, mother and stepfather, and mother who was home when he went missing, did not speak to media. And in talking to, over the years, to different mothers, and also in doing many of these cases, it basically comes down to, you can't stop a mother from calling out to her missing child. The only exception I've seen with that over the years, very sad exceptions, is when police have revealed to the mother and father blood evidence that the child is no longer alive. And she has a terrible resistance to that can last years, whereas a father will begin to accept it.
Well, may I ask you this then? Do you think, and sorry to interrupt you, Chris Proudfoot has said a few times, when the truth comes out, Do you think there's a chance that they were told something that perhaps Seth Rogers wasn't told?
No, because, and the reason I say no so plainly on that one is because if you're hiding a secret like that, it's really difficult to get by with the language without indicating missing information. More than 90% of deception comes from withheld information, critically withheld. And what that means very specifically is I'm thinking about something and I'm thinking about not saying it to you. And so it becomes a pressure on me to avoid that, to avoid giving out that missing information. And so when you have something like that, first of all, the despair is going to be off the charts.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
They held their silence for a reason. There's always a reason. And it's been on so many missing child cases where there's guilt involved. So I'm on high alert for guilt. Oh no, is this another case where someone killed a child and hid the body? It's just, so many of them.
Right.
Then they spoke. I just stated my notes. I hope that's visible for everybody. In their initial interview, neither the mother nor stepfather linguistically indicated guilty knowledge of Sebastian being dead, nor did they indicate guilty knowledge of his location. This is what we call reliably reported information. Generally speaking, shorter sentences, firm commitment, past tense for past tense events, past tense verbs, no need to persuade. There were certain things that are so elevated of guilt, having killed a child and concealed the body, that they can't help but keep talking and tripping over themselves. If this part that I'm saying is reliable, if this is incorrect information, then they're sociopathic. The sociopath can do that.
Wow.
So when people say, what about the empathy, the lack of empathy from stepfather, which we'll get to.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
So what I believe, and I don't know, but what I believe, and I'm open to other opinions, is that mother could pass a polygraph. Did you kill your child? Did you directly harm your child? Do you know where your child is? She could pass those things according to the language. I don't find her to be sociopathic. Generally, you see that later on.
Right.
She could pass the polygraph, but he had the need to deceive about the polygraph. He misled people into believing that he also passed the polygraph, and then that story changed.
Right.
Nancy Grace offered it, and I think he said at the time that he would take it. Is that correct?
He did. He said, name the time and place was his exact words.
That's the language of challenge. Let's bring it on. Let's rumble.
Yeah, exactly.
That's his personality.
But if you noticed on the show, he was very toned down with Nancy compared to all of his other interviews with other YouTubers, podcasters. He was very reserved. He was very, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And it was very different than what I think a lot of us have seen in his other interviews. And then I think when he came out and said that, name the time and the place, you're like, there he is. I'm not going to say a-hole, but to me, I was like, that's what he's been missing this entire interview. But another question that I do have about this is when he supposedly did lie about this and say, oh, well, actually, I can't take the lie detector test or the polygraph, I'm sorry, because the TBI said I couldn't. Why is that? Why would they allow Katie to and Seth to, but not Chris?
Yeah, I think he's lying.
He's lying. Yeah, because that makes no sense at all. Like, why would you be the only one that can't take it?
And what's interesting about the lie itself is that it's easily disproven. You just
Dave Mack was on the phone though with the TBI the morning that we discussed this, and the TBI wouldn't tell Dave anything. Dave he works for Crime Online, so because they were trying to confirm that because that's what we discussed on the show. Well, why can't he take it all of a sudden? So Dave's like, let me call the TBI. I'll get it directly from them. And they wouldn't tell him anything.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the answer there. If they have open communications with Proudfoot, they're not going to want to sabotage that.
Right.
If there's no guilt behind this, there's no reason to lie. There's no reason to withhold information.
Exactly.
And there's no reason to be challenged. Paul had asked a question recently, and we decided to do it on an X post on it. And he was talking about the word case, and Paul's a deep thinker, and he was correctly identifying distancing language. And it's difficult to explain in X amount of characters, posting like that. But what he was looking at was a greater context of my 15-year-old stepson is missing. So if you say, hey, what about your CPS case? Now, I may respond to it and use that word case, but then what the expectation is, my priority is so severely front and center in my language. All I care about is Sebastian being found. I'm going to, it's like an overruling of whatever topic an interviewer was throwing at me, including the Child Protective Services. So that's where you get reflective language. The CPS case with my daughter has nothing to do with the Sebastian CPS case.
Right.
That sort of thing. You get the repetition, you get the easy reflective language, but then you wait for a second, and you have the expectation is back to Sebastian, back to why I'm here. This is an extraordinary context. A child is missing. A special needs child is missing. A special needs child has been missing for weeks. So it grows in magnitude. And that's not what we saw there. And then another thing that they reported reliably, which actually bothered me, was their insistence and consistency in he went out the door, and whatever wording they used about going out the door.
Walked out the door.
Yeah. How do you know? So they have a need to explain why they know without using the word why, and the door was locked. Okay? How do you know he wasn't coerced? How do you know he wasn't taken? And so then you listen more to their discussion, and you can see, even in the first video, this is coordinated language. This is obviously he's the dominant one. He wasn't there. He's the dominant one. And she looked like the hostage there under his domination. By the way, that's what I think. I think he wasn't ready for Nancy Grace's forcefulness.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. And that's why he said he couldn't go on a second time. You know that the second time I was on, they originally asked Chris and Katie to come on. And of course, law enforcement says we can't. Sorry. What are you talking about? No, they didn't. They literally didn't say that at all. Seth jumped on right away. Yeah. Literally. Never said that.
And he's fabricating reality. So I'm more concerned because that puts him in a level of deception that is dangerous.
Right. I think, and days before he's on with Fox and Friends. So what? All of a sudden, 3 days later, they're like, nope, no more. No, he's scared crapless of Nancy. I'm sorry. He is. He doesn't like that she puts him on the spot and that she's caught him in so many conflicting statements that she calls out on the next show. So he knows, in my opinion, that he goes on there again, he starts talking out of his butt, everyone's going to call this out because that's what's been going on for the last month and a half.
I don't think he has a real favorable disposition towards strong women.
You absolutely nailed it. Absolutely. Yeah. You can tell with Katie's timidness and her rocking back and forth and her looking at him for approval. And it's super sad. It's super sad.
And I take that, that's a small context, him and small women. And Sebastian wasn't a small woman, but he was a young boy. And he may have mentally not been 15, and I know there's some differences regarding that.
Yeah.
And he was allegedly sexually abused, and I can say that because it's something that's out there now.
Mm-hmm.
Given the nature of resentment towards strong women, it may be a resentment of any type of perceived weakness. And I think he may have ridiculed Sebastian's masculinity.
Oh.
Same vein.
Yeah, I can see that. And you can just, I mean, you get this sense, and we've discussed this offline, that Sebastian may have been a point of contention in their marriage. Sebastian, like you said, he's 15, he's autistic, he has special needs, and that requires a lot of attention. And these kids don't react the same way to certain things a regular 15-year-old would react. And so I think this goes back to Katie, let's say the night that Sebastian disappeared, being on the phone with her husband for hours. I mean, that in itself was like, wait, what? I love my husband dearly, but when he travels for work, it's kind of like, hey, you good? A text, unless we're in the middle of a very serious argument, discussion, something that needs to be, so it's just like, what? That can't be a normal occurrence where you're falling asleep on the phone with your husband who travels there. It's just, it's very strange, very strange. So I speculated they were having an argument or discussion, possibly about Sebastian.
Well, I'll take that even a step further.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, and here's why. It entered the language while the 15-year-old was missing. So when this is a whole new context. It's not, it's not common everyday occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
It is in talking about the 15-year-old that's missing, who's vulnerable. I don't know how he's eating. I don't know how he's surviving. I don't know if he's warm. I saw the temperatures were cold. I don't know any of those things, which should be inflaming my maternal instinct.
Yeah.
So when a conversation enters a statement or an interview, it's always important. In fact, I think it's the key to this case.
I mean, just like going a bit off topic here, as a mother myself, I get it. You have to eat. The fact that they dine out, and I'm not saying, oh yes, dining out makes you guilty. You have something to do with your son's disappearance because you're at a restaurant. Listen, I'm a reasonable person. I physically do not think I would be able to do that, knowing my child could be out there. And excuse me if I look like a cartoon, an emotional cartoon, because it irks me to my core that you can sit at a restaurant, have a discussion with your spouse. It irks me that you can leave town. Your child, if they come home and you're not there, I will stay in that house that my child knows for 30 years, hoping he comes home. This is completely abnormal, and it's just unacceptable. And again, I'm not implicating guilt, okay? I'm just implicating the fact that, do you not care? Do you know what happened to him? Do you know that he's eating? Do you know that he's not hungry? All of this would allude to the fact that they do, based on their behavior. And the attacking of each other, the attacking of Katie with Seth. Oh, I can't believe he would put this information out there. That's what you're worried about right now? Literally, that's what you're worried about? That's a very strange thing to write a long Facebook post about. Like, what irks you about your ex airing dirty laundry? I get it. You don't want that out there. But man, write a long paragraph about your son that's missing.
Lauren, I'm almost fully convinced that what took place allegedly years ago crept into the language of concern, but was part of the reason that there was what I believe to be great contention between stepfather and Sebastian. I think that Someone asked a really simple question in one of the interviews, and there's too many interviews for me to keep track of, but one of them,
Same here.
someone said, "Hey, when did you first get with Katie?" And he was offended, and he didn't want to answer it. And so he avoided giving any dating, but he said, "I've been in Sebastian's life for more than half of his life." That was his answer. And I thought to myself, why is that so sensitive to him? Why, he's 15, and I'm going to go back to when he was a younger boy in the big context of while he's missing. So
Yeah.
I know this date here is important to this guy while Sebastian is missing. And so when I was first told about that, I believed it. It was reliably reported, and it came as, if it did indeed come, but if it did, it came as a matter of neglect when he was left alone and molested. And I can see someone who absolutely has some real mental health issues right out front. He's married 5 times. He gives out marital advice.
And
ridiculing Sebastian's masculinity.
I do believe that he, from what Nina Gomez said, his ex, I believe there was allegations that he did get with Katie while he was still married to Nina. But again, like you just said, a child is missing. A child is in distress here. Who gives a crap about your reputation right now? And that is all Chris Proudfoot seems to be concerned with, is his reputation and keeping his personal life story straight.
To the point of that, the language matches. It's his priority. You can simply count the number of words he dedicates to himself versus the number of words he dedicates to Sebastian.
Bingo.
You can also compare the number of words that he uses to denigrate or subtly blame Sebastian.
Yeah.
So beneath this whole thing, there's some very serious guilt, and they share in it. Some people believe they killed him, and this is where I'm going with this. So they committed to, he went out the door. And it could be a subtle way of blaming, or they could actually know that being true. And if so, it's producing in them distancing language and signals of withholding information that is critical to the case. That means I'm making an effort to keep back about it. And so everyone's kind of asking, well, if he went out the door, A, how do you know that? How do you come to such a conclusion so quickly? And they weren't budging from that. No. And then you say, what caused him to go out that door? And the more they have spoken, and as I'm trying to understand the intensity of the guilt in the language, the more I think he was put out against his will as a form of punishment, which, with the intensity of the stepfather's language, that was on that phone call.
I'm in agreement with you, especially because I feel like there's a time, or there are times, when somebody tells 60% of the truth just to get their story straight. And Katie did say, oh, well, I heard a bang from his room around 10 p.m. or so. And I shouted to him, you better be in bed, buddy, or whatever. Well, that kind of indicated to me something was going on there. You feel the need to say that just to get it out there and be halfway truthful. I believe you went into that room. You caught him doing something while you're on the phone with Chris. And Chris says, that's it. That's, whatever. And she does this. Maybe, let's say she does allegedly put him outside. She stays on the phone with Chris. Maybe Sebastian's banging on the door. Maybe he's crying and she's saying, what do I do? And he's saying, keep him out there. Keep him out there. And then an hour goes by. She's still on the phone with him. He's still out there. And Chris says, okay, just go to bed. He'll learn a lesson. He'll sleep in the garage. He'll sleep outside. That'll teach him.
And you're correctly identifying that it came into his language or came into her language while Sebastian is missing. And there's more keys that follow, but I'm in agreement with that as well. This lengthy phone call showed a need. And by the way, if I could just speculate on the 10 p.m. noise, I think there was a noise, and I think it was an altercation.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Yep.
You mean with Sebastian by himself, or do you think somebody else was in there?
His mother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think there was an altercation. It's hard to describe this, but when a child is sexually abused, there's going to be suffering for the rest of his or her life. And people that are close to and love that victim may also suffer. Now, there's a lot of ways to mitigate some of the suffering, but it's always a scar there. I hate to sound like pessimistic with it, but it is really traumatic that impacts behavior.
Yeah.
And so he could have had acting out behaviors. I think that might have been in the CES language.
Yes.
And issues of anxiety that caused his need to have a pull-up. And that entered their language. And in other words, what they're telling us is, look at our suffering, especially stepfather. Look what I have to put up with.
Unreal.
So I think this phone call, which entered the language that they needed to tell, was all about what happened. And that's why I say there is a significant delay in calling police, which is where I wanted to go with this thing anyway.
Right.
But in calling law enforcement, a delay of many hours. So it's scary.
What do you make of the fact now that we're all a bit confused about the dogs picking up a scent, possibly not picking up a scent? I mean, it's very conflicting. And again, as a parent, I would be at the sheriff's office. I would be with the TBI pretty much every day, taking notes on what is correct, what is not correct, what is factual, everything here. So we have our story straight. So people helping, and since the public seems to have such an interest in this, everybody can have the correct facts so they can, help properly and help efficiently. And that's also been really something that I've been struggling with, where it's like, what is the point of doing all of these random interviews with some of the YouTubers? Sure, they have a big following, but others, they don't. And it's just, I've never seen anything like this circus. The parents like writing on Facebook, talking back to people. And it's the whole thing is like, it's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And sorry, I got very off topic there, but I meant to say, talking about the scent and how scent was not picked up. And then, maybe it was.
I think that not being addressed directly in the press conference tells us that maybe it's something they don't want to share at this point. I think that some investigators will initially say, oh, look how cooperative this guy is, and then hear the interviews go, wow, this is a controlling monster here. What's going on?
Right.
So I don't know for that, and I'm waiting for more information to come out. But I think a lot of people recognize that in the initial interview, the Breaking the Silence interview, everyone saw how controlling stepfather was, how he controlled the information. And you can see it's obsessive in going on different YouTube channels that don't have large audiences.
Yeah.
And so you say, well, better late to the party than not at all. At least he's promoting. And he really wasn't promoting. He was promoting himself. It was an apology tour.
That was my whole point. Yeah, it was strange. It was all about him.
Yes, to rehabilitate his image. One of the things I also wanted to touch upon before I just had some thoughts on the 911 call. And for those of you that are not in the United States, that's our emergency line. Is I mentioned the I love you. So every time Heather and I talk on the phone or at night, we always say I love you to each other. There's no need to share that, except here by example, but there's no need for me to share that And picture, I go to work and I say, hey, how's everybody doing? Hey, I love my wife. I said, I love you last night. Everyone will look at me like kind of strange.
Exactly.
The context, and this is not simply this case, but in cases in general, I love you is often an indication of a very bad relationship. And in some cases, I love you has pointed to the time of death. Now, I'm not saying that's what the case is here. I am saying that the I love you, the inclusion of a missing child case, right off the bat, the I love you is telling you this was a bad, contentious relationship, at least between mother and son that night.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Only because you only bring up the last thing you said to somebody if it was not great or people are upset and they say, I'm so upset. We got in a fight and, we went to bed angry, or I said F you instead. So I totally agree with you. What is the point of sharing that? Goes without saying, you love your kid.
We have this as very common in child abuse cases. And I've shared this before, but there was a time when I was giving this as a study for attorneys. And I said, I love you is a signal of a very poor relationship. And everybody like, you're crazy. What does that mean? And then I explained why. I said, you don't have to raise your hand, but probably everyone here present said, I love you to your children before you went to sleep last night. And they all nodded their head.
Yeah.
I said, it's the need to raise the issue in certain contexts, including criminal and child protective investigations, that tells you something is very wrong. And that made sense to everyone except one person who objected. And she was very firm, and she said, I hear what you're saying, but I do want people to know that I love my child. And this is in front of a group of attorneys. And I had known that there had been a child protective report on that particular person just prior, a day or two prior.
There you go.
We find it in a lot of cases where a child is removed from the home. So it's a portrayal. In this type of situation with a child missing, there's no need to say it. Of course you love your child, because when the moment that you discovered your child was missing, you ran out and told everyone and everyone's mother, this is what he looks like. This is what his behavior's like. This is what to look for. This is how to approach him. These are the favorite places he likes to go. This is some of the issues he may be having, which didn't happen. They had to be provoked into that.
Exactly. From the beginning, you're right. There was no sense of urgency, no neighbors involved, no nothing that the public is aware of. So you're absolutely right. And
in the same theme of this, in domestic violence cases, domestic homicide cases, it often can pinpoint the time of death in a statement where someone says various forms of bye or see you later, or especially someone that's saying goodbye using a term of endearment. And
right.
A lot of investigators believe that when someone shot, for example, an estranged wife, it was talk to you later, and literally those words, and then the gunshot. But it can help us pinpoint within a statement where that took place. So then back to control.
Wow.
Subsequent interviews were inflammatory. Stepfather began to, the mask came off, at least with the Nancy Grace one, but the gloves, the mask, everything was off in some of these interviews. He was not only combative, but he was enjoying it.
Yes.
He enjoyed the challenge.
That was the strangest thing. That's what everybody has been speaking about, is like, why does he seem so excited to call people out, to try to prove somebody wrong? It's again, going back, it's only about himself. That is it. And it is really interesting. I think he does exhibit these narcissistic qualities because he seems to think that his lies cannot be called out and people can't prove his lies, which is why it's so strange. And some of the things he says is so outlandish. I mean, and you can add to that, but that's definitely has to be part of a narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes, he shows very strongly narcissistic. He shows an incredible lack of empathy. Now, sometimes we have a lack of empathy by a guilty parent because the parent's priority is self-preservation, but he never lets that down. And, obviously he's going to have problems he's a young man on his 5th marriage, and I think probably this one's not going to last either. But that combative nature and why it's so important to me, the language of physicality, the boasting of marital and parental advice by him, and even to the point of the challenges where he says things like, ask me anything, I'm ready to take anything, and then he ducks it. He won't take anything. That's what Sebastian, as a 15-year-old boy, lived under. That is not a household to create someone to be confident and be able to survive in the world, and then add on his autism.
Yeah.
The deck was stacked against him terribly.
I think that's what has also drawn so many people to this case is these sweet pictures of Sebastian. He looks like, I mean, he looks like the sweetest child with his animals and, his smile. And then you have his stepfather and you learn about his past and you learn about what he has dealt with. And man, it really breaks you, Peter. And it makes me angry almost, because I think Cheryl said it on Nancy the other day. She said, they're not looking for a child that's alive anymore. There is no way, with the parents gone, searching Kentucky landfills. And and obviously I could be wrong, right? She could be wrong. I mean, you don't know, but everything is pointing to that here. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of people failed this kid. A lot of people failed him. So I think, and namely his mother. And I don't want to also add anything onto her pain right now, because I'm sure she is feeling pain. I'm sure she is feeling horrible. But I do think that perhaps she did not always have Sebastian's best interest at heart, especially, when it came to his stepfather.
I agree. And I think that she failed to protect. I think that she had, this guy comes into her life and he's married at that point 4 times. Mm-hmm. And to subject Sebastian to that. Yeah. It's a lot of mothers of autistic children are following this case and they're very angry. They're very emotional and they're very angry. I'm looking for a quote, just if I could for a moment.
Yeah, I can share something as well while you find that. A local source did indicate that somebody saw something fairly recently, an incident with Sebastian at a grocery store where Chris allegedly was very forceful and rough with him, so much so that Sebastian hid behind a cash register. So I'm looking into that, and I'm going to be reaching out to that grocery store to see if they have any additional information about that, if they witnessed that, because that again is just one more instance of just pure and utter heartbreak.
There was a question that was asked of him on one of the interviews, so I'm looking for now, which is, quote, was chilling. He sometimes answers questions with questions. Now, that is generally considered an idea of sensitivity, meaning that I need more time to think before I answer. Some people will even go as far as making that a habit. And so when a question, if you say, hey, Peter, is there a surprise birthday party for Heather tonight? And I say, oh, there's a surprise birthday for Heather tonight. No, it's obviously sensitive and I want to hide the information. Right, so I repeat it just to buy a little time to think about it. If you say to me, is there a surprise party for Heather tonight? By me reflecting the language back to you and just getting a little time to think about what kind of good answer I can give to that one, because I don't want to give the information away, I'm going to use the language that you just used. That's very natural. That's normal. If I change that language on a sensitive question, if I change that language, it takes much more effort and there's much more information to be gleaned from that. And one of the questions he was asked was about acting out behaviors. And I want to show his answer, because if you listen to the answer separate from the question, it doesn't sound terrible.
Okay.
So he was asked if Sebastian had meltdowns. And so it's easy for me that now I can put myself in his shoes. I'm going to use the word meltdown. Well, sometimes he had meltdowns, but he was okay. And this is what he did. He paused and said, was he a violent kid? No. And there was the past tense reference.
Was he? Mm-hmm.
Yes. This indicates now a belief that he has that Sebastian isn't coming home. And I wonder if playing the victim, which he does, against all odds and the world's against me and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Did that help convince mother to leave the home? Which I think that how you described it, I'd be there for 30 years if that's what it took. This is his home. This is what he's familiar with. This is where he'll wander back. Just that hope against hope.
I can't imagine. And they actually positioned it like, well, we're getting death threats. We're getting, Katie's scared. She's getting harassed. It's like, report it to the police, and then they'll protect you. They'll put cop cars outside your house. There are ways around that. You don't have to leave your house. So that answer was BS to me. Yes,
and me too. The only thing I think that could get a mother away is the belief that he's not able to come home. But did he have meltdowns? What this answer reveals is he gives a rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions within analysis, contextually appropriate, are vital in understanding. So when he said, was he a violent kid? No. At that point, I said to myself, 10 p.m., there was violence. And he was a rather small, vulnerable kid who may have been made, I believe this to be true, I shouldn't even say may, from my opinion, he was made far more vulnerable by the brutish nature and the combative nature of the stepfather, including possibly wetting the bed or incontinence due to anxiety.
That's so interesting. The violent, that word, that you were able to pick that out from one interview and put it together with something that possibly happened that night around 10 p.m. or whatever the time frame was. And so essentially what a lot of people have also been asking, that it seems like you believe this, they did in fact make it home from the restaurant. Because a lot of people are like, well, did they even make it home? How do we know they made it home? No one seemed to see him except for Katie after that restaurant footage.
I also think that's a fair question to ask. So I don't, my answer to that is not very strong. My answer is, I trust that law enforcement would know that, but I really don't know.
Yeah, and Seth obviously Seth Rogers, very tight-lipped about the video footage that he saw. And Seth has been pretty much an open book on most things, except for what law enforcement tells him not to share. And that seems valid, right? Everything Chris is saying, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't give this interview. Okay, whatever. Seth is saying, I can't share what I saw on this video. I believe it. But I'm thinking to myself, what the heck did you see on this video?
I also think it would be very easy for a prosecutor to get stepfather on the stand and set him off. Let the true nature come flying out with all the colors and all the things. And he is someone, a personality wise, that would demand to take a polygraph and then fail, who would demand that he's going to do this or do that. He, to rush forward in kind of a bravado that isn't going to match the truth. So
Right.
in the
Right.
interview after interview after interview, he was in control. Now, this is a little bit of rear view mirror analysis, but I don't think anyone's going to say, hey, I disagree with you. He wasn't in control. It's just one of those things that was really shocking to see how bold and brazen he was with that. And then we get to the original calling of police. So here's that control. We saw it, the need to control on their campaign to remove guilt, suggests guilt itself. The need to control is showing concealing of information, the coordinated language. And I think everyone probably agrees with that. The emergency call should have been to 911 and made by the parent who was in the home when the child went missing. It is not best that the call come from someone who is not a parent, who wasn't there, and who's 3 hours away.
That to me was so mind-blowing as a mother. I was shocked at that. Absolutely shocked. I mean, yeah.
How would I keep you off the phone?
I honestly, I don't even think I would call my husband first. I would just call 911 and I would fill my husband in later. I mean, that is also so strange.
Yeah. I think he was concerned about this being recorded.
Well, of course, aren't all calls recorded, 911 calls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know about the call directly to the sheriff's department, whether that's recorded or not. I don't know.
Sorry. Okay. Got it.
So the person that is close, has the closest information, not secondary or tertiary, but right there, is the person they want to talk to. Now, there's an objection. Some say, well, if he called 911, it would mean a delay in getting help due to a jurisdiction of coverage to the sheriff's department. As far as my understanding is, a simple press of a button and it goes right there.
That's my understanding as well.
Okay, so let's take this though and say, okay, well, if that's really true, then definitely better to call the sheriff's department, even though I think it could be at least in his mind how to A, avoid this being recorded, and B, how to control the information. The answer to this objection is simple. The stepfather should have then given the mother, here's the number, call them now.
Right.
This is urgent.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't done either. So the concern is this an attempt to control the information, which is what we've seen precisely, rearview mirror, in all the interviews. This is obviously what the dynamic of their relationship is. He is controlling. And he's got some.
I mean, and I think that we're all very interested to know. I mean, I can imagine if you got your hands on this recording, what you would make of it. Is he going to be overselling the story? Is he going to be over explaining, giving way too much information instead of my kid is missing, please help? So I'm really interested in hearing that whenever it comes out.
And I share that as well. He shouldn't have been on the call.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
Think about in missing child cases, one of the things we look at, say, we called 911. Right when we see we, what do you mean we? Who's we? Did you stand by the phone and pass it back and forth to each other? That sort of thing.
Right.
Some operators, when they get those calls, they'll say, is the mother there? I can speak to her, which is a really good thing to do. And then ask them other questions.
Right.
In DV cases, can you imagine taking a DV call, a domestic violence call, from the boyfriend?
With the abuser. Yeah. I mean, it's It's so confusing. And it's funny that we are just now speaking about this, because I didn't really think of it, I guess at first. Like, why did he call? Why did she not call? And now that we're talking about it, I'm very disturbed.
Let me take that screen off. See how it goes. There we go. And see if do you have time to take some questions, Lauren?
Let me just get my child, and then yes, I do. Hold on.
Okay. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask at this point, I'll try to read them from the comments. I learned the great trick of having to put it up on the screen. I hope that's helpful. Also, disagreements are welcome. They're good to debate back and forth and try to understand what happened. I mentioned a previous video that I've learned over a lot of years that where the language and the details of the case don't match, that I've stayed with the language. And then when the details come out, it's like, oh, that does make sense now. That's why they said such and such. That's why that was sensitive. And sometimes it's innocuous. When I was speaking once to a group of people, I said, when someone repeats a question back to you, it means the question is sensitive. And someone objected, said, well, I'm hard of hearing, so I repeat back all the questions. And I said, that's what makes the question sensitive to you, the struggle with hearing.
And I'll also say, like, as a talking head sometimes on a media outlet, I don't know what they're going to ask me. And so I will sometimes, because I don't know the answer off the top of my head, I have to think about it. So I will sort of repeat it, and I'll kind of dance around it. But it's purposeful. It's literally because I don't know what I'm going to say yet, which could indicate that that's Chris Proudfoot. He doesn't know what he's going to say yet.
Well, what I've found is that sometimes I get lost in concentration on something, so it looks like I'm zoning out. Either that or I'm just getting very old, and it makes me look really smart.
Where you're like squinting and you're like, yeah, no. Well, luckily you are smart. You're very smart. So you've got that going for you.
Heather's given odds against that one.
So I don't know if you saw Mac. She said there are numerous cases where the quote unquote killer did not call 911. Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think this goes back to part of Chris Proudfoot's control. He needs to be in control at all times. He needs to control the narrative, and the sheriff's call is no different.
That's what I think took place.
Yeah.
And even if it was a jurisdiction issue, she should have been calling. I need to hear from her. She was there. Not from someone else, and not from someone else's relative or anything like that.
Right.
Let me see if there's any questions or anything like that. Here's one.
Yeah.
Since managing the narrative is so important to the Proudfoots, what significance could there be to emphasis on no shoes? They've stressed that since the beginning. You want to try that, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe from a law enforcement perspective, and I'm not law enforcement, I think they said that because they knew maybe their house would be searched, everything would be searched, and they would have to show them that supposedly Sebastian had no shoes missing from the house. So that would indicate that they're telling the truth. He walked out barefoot. None of his shoes are missing. Me personally, I actually, not that my kids have so many shoes, but their shoes are scattered everywhere. I have no idea if shoes would be missing or not. So I found that to also be really weird. There's also the fire ant debacle where, you know, he stepped in a fire ant hill and he doesn't want to go barefoot anymore. And that as well is an indication to us here. And, you know, I think Seth Rogers was the one that shared that. So maybe the Proudfoots did not kind of put that together when they were like, no shoes, no shoes. But to the rest of us, we're like, well, wait a second. If he had no shoes and you were possibly involved, this is more evil than we think. This is way more evil.
Just the fact that they mentioned it made it important, and then they emphasized it, made it even more important. Sadly, I think it was part of the punishment.
Oh,
they're going to make him a man. You know, that's Stepfather. They're going to make him a man. It's the other ones everyone has here.
Yeah. And by the way, Cheryl said Scott Peterson, Chris Watts, Kate C. Anthony, Drew Peterson, Barry Morphew, all didn't call. So ask Peter about leakage when the stepdad said Sebastian was a bottomless pit, and Chris Watts had said, oh God, Cheryl, as I'm reading that's Chris Watts had said the girls barreled toward me and they were found in a barrel.
Yes. I think those places should be searched. It could be, at minimum, a type of latency within the language that he may be thinking to himself he fell in to a ditch someplace. Hasn't been found yet. My concern always, of course, with autistic children is in water, as they're drawn to water. But it's something that should be examined. So I think that's a good observation, a good question.
And just going back to what Cheryl said also is during the press conference, I don't know if you caught this, it was, the very weak press conference, law enforcement specifically said, if you live near a ledge, if you live near a pit, you need to call us and you need to, and I was like, that's so interesting. And then I brought this up to you as well. The first interview I think that we had ever talked about with the Proudfoots, they kept saying, oh, it's a roller coaster. We're on a roller coaster. And I'm like, I get it that that's a thing, but why do you keep saying roller coaster? What's up with that? It could be nothing, but I was like, I don't get it. I don't say that.
I think it was true. And when I tell you why I think it was true, because it bothered me as well.
Yeah.
Maybe even more bothersome. There are statements that I and the team have done over the years where the statement shows a very negative relationship between the abuser or the killer and the victim. Then, when the victim's dead, the language changes, the relationship is good, according to the statement.
Yeah.
The linguistic disposition changes. And so a roller coaster ride means I hear good news, I get bad news. I heard good news, I got knocked down. I think that at least with him, and she could be entering his language and mirroring him, but I think with him, he wanted to be free of Sebastian. And I don't want to be caught as seen as putting him out. I'm so glad he's gone. I'm free. I think it's a terrible
chills.
A terrible, terrible thing.
Oh my gosh, I totally got chills because that makes so much sense where he's like, actually, now I'm good. I can just be with my wife and not deal with this child. But now look at what I'm dealing with. All these interviews, we have to possibly pretend. I mean, oh my gosh, that's very disturbing to think about.
Someone had commented they thought the right questions would have been asked. You might want to avoid it. I think that's good.
Yep.
Is it true Chris Proudfoot has only agreed to do interviews with female interviewers? What are the implications, of course? What do you think with that?
Well, he addressed that, which I thought it's funny that was asked. I had screenshotted this in a Facebook group because that exact thing, his response really, really bothered me because he said, that is not true. I have spoken to more male law enforcement in the past 30 days than my entire life, or something along the lines of that. And it's like, what do you want a pat on the back for cooperating about a missing child, your missing stepson that you've allegedly been a part of his life for 7.5 years? What kind of answer is that? That was very bothersome. So he claims, he was like, nope, I like, you should go. I talked to more male law enforcement, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, good for you, buddy.
I've said that I've interviewed Chris Proudfoot 100 times, meaning that he uses the language that is typical or classic, in other words, repetitive and easy to spot the patterns of an abuser. And then for him to rally up to defend himself about talking to men and running into Nancy Grace's strong persona.
Yeah.
I think that it is a red flag. I think it was part of the weakness of his personality. And I think it is probably, well, more than probably, I think that's what Sebastian experienced, was the rage of a very small man internally.
Yep.
How could cops know that no shoes were missing? They don't keep track of such kids' shoes. Yeah, and that's, which is a good observation. I think
Yeah.
that has to do with the punishment.
Yeah, and and also footprints, right? Footprints outside. Maybe they were concerned that, okay, well, if they do find any footprints, they'll be barefoot, I mean, but you're right. They don't keep track of kids' shoes. I just had this feeling, and maybe, Cheryl could speak to more of that, how they would be able to tell and why that was such an important thing for the Proudfoots to say. No shoes, no shoes.
I go back to this being part of punishment and making him a man from a really small guy.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't know about doing interviews with males. Shoes were kept at the door. I recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just
as far as Chris Proudfoot said he's been doing interviews with law enforcement, males in law enforcement. And I think people were referring to podcasters and just journalists. Have the Proudfoot show. Yeah. So on Nancy's show, I believe she did the first time she did an episode on Sebastian, she did have somebody in law enforcement actually bring this up because it was publicized. Sebastian was last seen wearing a black sweatshirt, black sweatpants. And I believe the law enforcement officer said, well, are you sure about that? Are we sure? I mean, you say that because that's, maybe what Katie said, but we don't actually know that. So I found that to be really interesting. Max said they knew he would be found without shoes on. That was a mistake. If he left on his own, he would have had shoes on. So they wanted that to be covered.
I think that's a good point.
That's a really good point.
And that would speak to putting him out as punishment deliberately. And that really I think that throws, I don't know her as well as I know him in the sense that she has spoken much less. I do know some of her from actually being silent and letting him take over, including this call to law enforcement in terms of personality and submissiveness. I tell you what, I would have a female interviewer interview him, of course, separately, and be very much laid back, empathetic, and give a subtle, not a strong signal, but a subtle signal of weakness in her. And then at the right moment, turn on the strength and watch him change.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And Mac, he said something else or she said something else here that is really interesting. And this also reminds me of Summer Wells, which also, the TBI is in charge of. Mom said she believes that someone has him. Why? There's zero evidence. The doors were allegedly locked. He had no cell phone. The dogs didn't bark. So in the case of Summer Wells, who still hasn't been found after almost 3 years in the same, state, Tennessee, investigated by the TBI, her parents said, I believe somebody has her. Her parents have criminal records. They were sort of looked at like the Proudfoots. So this is also really interesting stuff. What indicates somebody has him?
Mother, in the Summer Wells case, mother was deceptive in her statement.
Right.
I did on that. She's lying about what happened just before going missing. And father gave indication, and I recommended people going back to Chris McDonough's interviewing of sexual abuse. So that poor kiddo had no chance. How about this one? Did mom go door to door asking if Sebastian had knocked her, had seen him there? First thing.
That was something I thought of when she called her husband before she called law enforcement, and something as a mother that I would do is probably run out like a crazy person and start. Now I live in Manhattan, but I'd start knocking on apartment doors. I'd start, she has never stated that she did this. As far as I know, her neighbors have not spoken out. But again, there are so many Facebook groups and so many groups that say one thing or another. I don't know what to believe.
As far as I know, there wasn't that initial response. There was the need to break the silence a week in. So this is an interesting case. This was a local case here in Maine years ago where baby Ayla went missing. And she was reported kidnapped from her Waterville, Maine home, where she was at that time with her father. The mother wasn't there. The father's girlfriend, his sister, and his sister's baby. And so someone was able to get into the home, go through a window, remove a toddler, not wake up father, not wake up girlfriend, not wake up sister, not wake up sister's baby, and get out with not even trace DNA, nothing. And so the father was then taking some heat. And I don't know if Nancy Grace would remember this or not, but he began to complain. And at the time I was in contact with the baby's mother. And I wanted him pushed. This was a very small man, another internally small man, who I believed had done some pretty bad things to that baby. He played himself as a victim. He's the one that said, when he was asked, did you pass your polygraph? He changed the language of passing a polygraph to, I smoked it. It was indicating drug use.
Yeah.
So he was whining one day, and the maternal family was trying to push to get answers. They knew that she hadn't been kidnapped, and so did law enforcement. And he finally was provoked into coming out and speaking. And he said, contrary to rumors floating around out there, I have been cooperating with police. And floating out there, the baby was put in water. That's what I believed right at the time and still do. Then he said, I think it was being covered in the Nancy Grace show. And then he said some derogatory things about Nancy Grace and said, she needs to come to Maine and walk in my shoes to know how much I'm suffering. So as far as I understand, the producers called and said, hey, we're coming to Maine. We'll interview you. He disappeared. And this is what he said. This is a very important statement. He was being challenged. Why aren't you out there? Why aren't you searching? Why aren't you helping? I'm not emotionally capable right now.
Wow.
Here's the behavioral analysis of that, and people can draw their own conclusion here. I'm shopping for groceries at a large grocery store with my toddler. My toddler wanders off. Everyone has an expectation that I'm going to say, call out my toddler's name. Say, where are you? And if I don't find her, the panic is going to get such that I'm going to have everyone lock the doors, police called, and search everywhere. That's the expectation.
Of course.
This type of behavior, this is how I liken it in the behavioral analysis. My toddler's missing and I'm pushing a shopping cart. I'm going to get to her. I'm going to, but I need just to get a few more groceries. I'm going to find her, but let me just check out first.
Wow.
I'm going to go home. I'm going to empty the groceries. Maybe I'll take a nap. And then I'm going to really start looking. And that is the complete denial of that powerful instinct. Remember the biblical comparison with a bear robbed of its cubs. The bear's not going to I'm hungry now. I'm going to take a break. The bear's going to tear you apart.
Exactly.
I mean, that's just what's going to happen. And those are what mother bears do. And so they will address all the needs. And the need is, here's his picture. Here's his special needs being described. Here's everything you need to know. Find my son. And let's just say And Aaron, law enforcement says, we don't want you out there talking now. Shut up. I'm talking. I'm going out there. You can't stop me.
Yeah. Right.
And that's the maternal instinct and fully engaged. And that's what people are commenting now about not seeing that.
Yeah. And Cheryl just said, going back to the food picture where people was like, they're like, oh, you know, they're at the Cracker Barrel. Everyone's like, cool, you're eating when Sebastian's missing, not knowing if he can eat or not. And that's basically stepdad says, well, we got to eat. Is Sebastian eating? You know, I mean, it's terrible.
Someone said,
by the way, was that baby ever found, Ayla?
The baby has not been found. The Kennebec River is a moving water, but lots of evidence, including blood.
Oh, no. I'm
So
going to look that up after.
It is not adjudicated at this time.
Sad.
And taking a 911 call from someone. Oh, by the way, the clothing thing, that's what I'm addressing. That should have been right up front. And I think a very clever observer, when I first made a video on this case, said, hey, she should have been given the behaviors too, right? Front and center, which I thought was excellent.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. It's sick that she didn't say X, Y. And I think you had pointed this out on one of the interviews. Seth Rogers said, if you find him, do not let him in your house. And I was like, wait, what? And I think you felt the same. And then later it was like, well, autistic kids, you know, they might react differently, that, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. I think most the comments I had, especially from women, was, I know he could act out. He's coming in the house until the police arrive. It's only gonna be a few minutes. That was just one of those surprising things that, you know, interviewers get nervous. It's live broadcast and not listening as carefully as they can, and other times in concentration and divided things. But that would have been a perfect time to say, hey, why not let him in? And Seth could have addressed some behavioral issues, which the public should have known from the beginning anyway, along with the description.
Agreed.
So, hey, this is interesting. Summer Wells likely ate cannabis candies and was left in the car while they did groceries instead of being taken care of. Then mom called dad, and he took care of a little one while mom drove home. Regarding drug cases, because I've been in too many of those, this was a tragic murder that just took place locally here, where the kiddo had lots of behaviors. And so when a child he's acting out not normal behaviors, some kind of neurological damage, they're at higher risk. It is what it is. You know, even the most well-meaning parents can lose their temper, or if they don't get enough breaks and respite or family support, it can be rough. This one was targeted with physical beatings. It was really bad. It went on for a while. He was brought to the hospital unresponsive. The charge nurse came out, and this is in the affidavit, told the mother and grandmother, we got a pulse back. His heart is beating, you know, giving them hope.
Yeah.
Their answer was, he's a liar. He lies all the time.
Oh, I remember this. Oh my gosh. What case was this? This
a local one here just a month or so ago.
I remember
what they were concerned about was what he's going to now say about them.
Oh my God.
And I think that's the same thing with the shoes, that they locked him out Sebastian without his shoes. Torture for someone like him that had been through what he was.
But Peter, I think that, and again, Cheryl maybe could speak to this as well. It's like, how had they not found anything when they've searched thousands of miles with drones, searching waterways, people on foot, law enforcement? What? Like nothing? Not one thing?
It really is more difficult than people recognize. And those that say one day his remains will be found because someone will trip over them.
Oh God.
And that really is something that happens quite frequently. Hey, this is a great comment. I'm constantly hearing, no matter who they interview, she took a piece of candy from grandma. They're telling someone something without saying it regarding that candy. Very good. That's good listening skill, and I respect that. Is Steph withholding information? I think that he was, and the ex-wife of stepfather was also, but that's going back and forth with the he said, she said type of information.
Right.
Not relating. I don't think Steph is under any suspicion regarding the disappearance.
No.
I found him reliable. I found her reliable too, but she had some very strong signals of missing information. I think that had to do with
Nina Gomez.
Yes, okay. Her role and her guilt.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
That's why I think, and I said this recently, that when she said, well, I did hit him, I think she should have said, I hit him. I should have hit him harder. I should have hit him more often. That type of anger that shows the truth, instead of trying to be concerned with one's own image. But what she did report about stepfather was consistent with everything that we saw in the interviews.
Totally. Yeah, I think one thing that just bugged me, and she said it twice, and this is just it could be nothing. I just didn't like when she said, I wish I never met him. I wish I never met him. You have a beautiful child because of him, So I was just like, you said it twice, and I'm like, all right, we get it. Can you rephrase that in a different way? Because your poor daughter is probably like if my mom said that about my dad, I'd be like, thanks a lot. But Cheryl said they've searched hundreds of square miles. I thought it was thousands, but I thought,
I do not believe he ran away unless he ran out the door for fear of losing his life. Otherwise, a teenager running away would take the most important things with him. Agree. If he ran out on his own out that door, which they are so confident that he did, the distress that he would have been under would have been extreme. For a kid to go out with his special needs, with what happened to him in childhood that the dad reliably reported in bare feet, no way that's going to happen. It would have to be out of his mind, have to be traumatized. I think it was an altercation. And I'm open to either way, whether he ran out because he was running for his life or just so emotionally distraught. Or that she put him out. I just lean towards, because the guilt is so heavy on people that I don't believe killed him directly. I think they're responsible for what happened to him, but I don't think they killed him directly or intentionally. It's so intense in the language, such a powerful need to prove how wonderful we are and how no way this could have happened like that, that I lean much, much towards this was punishment and this came from stepdad.
And Cheryl added, because stepdad was in another state and now they're in Mississippi, how many pits are there between these states? Sewers, construction pipes, you know what I mean? Like landfills, whatever. So I think that's also really interesting. But that right there, what that person just said and what you said, he's not going to run away barefoot without being traumatized or feeling his life's in danger.
I do not believe he walked out the door. I believe he was carried from the house to the garage to the Grove. A lot of people feel that way. There was another comment I saw that I wanted to get to that I thought was good here. He was not stealth enough to hide.
That's a good point.
Yep. That's why I fear the falling in water or someplace. And by the way, if I have to just make sure I qualify that, it is possible that if they put him out or if he ran, either way, that he was met up with by a stranger.
I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, but when the Secret Service is involved, I thought that would involve cyber crimes. So I thought, well, maybe they have some kind of tip that, he was playing Minecraft with somebody and he wanted, that kind of got into my head a little bit. So somebody could have met up with him. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think he felt trouble, whether it is in water or a pit or a
Mhm.
stranger.
Yeah.
But I think that they, and again, I'm open to other things, but I think they know he was through that door. And I think there was an altercation at the 10 p.m. hour or somewhere near there.
Right.
It's a good
Yeah.
point.
Why would the Secret Service be involved though, if it doesn't have anything to do with cyber crimes and
I'm not sure.
yeah.
No, I'm not sure. I
Interesting.
feel that very poorly about the press conference where basically it was, we're giving an update that we don't have an update and we're chiding social media. When really, if social media, no matter how emotional or all over the place it may be, it's got stepfather talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's true.
he's giving us insight.
That's true. It is a lot, but again, these are the people that care and that are on foot searching and finding these they're cyber sleuths essentially. And I think we've all seen how important cyber sleuths have been within the last 2 years.
Yeah, and whether someone's motive is selfish or if it is for the purpose of justice, it makes no difference. By addressing social media and telling people to cool it, it's basically like throwing gasoline on a fire because
Yeah.
they're furious every time stepfather opens his mouth. I'm waiting for someone to say, "Why don't you ever use his name?" I hardly use his name. I'm disgusted by him.
Yep.
Nina suggested that Chris and his family had a relationship with the sheriff's office. Yeah, I wondered about that too, whether or not I think he does show a level of confidence in his manipulative ways. So, Sarah, good observation with that.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean the first thing was yeah, exactly. The first one was that's what obviously the first one is what got us all triggered. All of us were like, wait, what? And then the fact that the first interview they did was a podcast on YouTube, not a small following, but not a crazy following. But I did get some information that the first podcast they did, and now I'm blanking on the name, it was like a friend of Katie's cousin or something. So that's why she did it. So I found that to be also a little odd.
And I think that's a good possibility. I think also that going to the largest audience first is going to be a natural reaction by a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Go national. Go as loud and large as you can. Climb to the top of the roof and yell out his name.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe he ran out and she locked the door or didn't go looking? Yes, I do, in a way. Then hours later, went looking for him and found him in a pond and then cover-up mode. I don't think the latter part to be so, and I could be wrong here, because I think that would be about his location. That would be one where she would directly fail a polygraph. That has to be a question asked, even though I don't know what the questions that were asked were, but that would have to be one of them. And I think that for a mother to be able to conceal that, especially when she was allowed to speak more, I think we pick it up. I think some people pick it up instinctively, but
yeah, I mean, I also want to point out that pond, Chris stated that they had drained that retention pond and they looked already. So, but again, I don't know if that is true. I don't know if that's false. Nobody's asked the sheriff or at the press conference, they didn't ask that. And I think we know now if you call the sheriff's office, like I have done, they're very elusive.
Yeah. And I understand because they're going to feel under attack themselves.
Of course.
Which should not have come across in the presser. And people wanted the Summer Wells case solved. And that's upsetting. As a matter of fact, I wonder about the journalists, the local journalists. The remains have been found that could be Summer Wells. I think if that remains after 6 weeks With Sebastian, family would have been notified already, recognizable. But with the time that's elapsed with Summer Wells, it's going to take time to get an answer. I would think that local media would be on the medical examiner's doorstep.
Right. You would think it, but look at that. This is really interesting. Choosing his punishment.
That sounds like stepfather. That observation. That sounds like him.
Yeah. Wow. I actually didn't think about that. The choosing of the punishment. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, is that a thing? Again, I live in the city. Do you know how deep your ponds are and I don't know.
I think most locals would know.
Okay.
Locals would know. And
yeah.
And you can't tell whether he's telling the truth on some of these statements because he's gaining a reputation for lying. I need him to speak freely and continually, and then I can.
Yeah, he told me that on Nancy Grace, he told me he and Katie were the ones responsible for bringing in the United Cajun Navy, when that is so far from the truth. That couldn't be further from the truth, and it's so easily provable.
One of the consistent elements within his lies is if it's grandiose or self-aggrandizing, that's him. You can say, oh, I think he's exaggerating or lying.
Yeah. Right.
Is there any more questions that people have that I may or may not, or Lauren may or may not have answers to? I'm going to have to end at this point. I just want to find out.
My children are biting at my ankles. It's a holiday today. I just pray for Sebastian. My gosh, I can't. I think about him every night, every day.
Each day gets a little bit more difficult to have any emotion behind the prayers, I think, as the reality sets in. And then the more this guy spoke, the less hope I had.
I agree with you. I mean, I think something on Nancy, the last show, When We No More Long. Yeah. Nancy had said something to another person, and she just said, what if he's being abused every day, sexually abused? What if he's held against us? And Seth Rogers he lost it. And it wasn't necessarily shown on air, but I think all of us on that panel, I was very choked up thinking about, you could see the father just sort of, Seth, the wheels turning, and it literally broke you.
Yeah, Nancy Grace is a mother, and she's actually speaking of that which we expect from an innocent mother. For any of us that are parents, there is no horror such as the horror of the unknown.
Yes.
We can't control it. We can't define it. It's dark. We can't see it. Our imaginations can go wild. That's what you expect to hear from an innocent parent that has no knowledge or belief that the child is dead. And all they want to do is to go out and help. And, I use kind of maybe an oversimplified analogy with that. But when my daughter was little, when she was hungry, I fed her. When she was uncomfortable, I comforted her. When she fell down and cut her knee, I put a Band-Aid on it. And so this becomes habitual and normal. It's just keep going. And then when a child goes missing, all of a sudden that parental instinct is cut. And this comes out in the language of someone that's utterly frustrating. Now, this isn't Nancy Grace's child. This isn't my child or your child or hundreds of others that listen to these things. Yeah. We all feel that. And we're upset that we didn't hear that from the mother. And I don't think that she's sociopathic. So why not? We're not hearing it because guilt and self-preservation are getting in the way. What exactly is that guilt? We probably will end up finding out. But I'm still betting on we put him out.
Yeah. Yeah. And this Jules, this is interesting. It's funny. I just learned, and this might sound silly, but I just learned about beta blockers. my husband, he gets nervous before big presentations, and we have a babysitter we use who's an actor, and she gets super nervous before auditions. So both of my husband and her, they were prescribed beta blockers, and that completely it releases the nerves, it calms you, it relaxes your body, and you're able to loosen up. You know, your singing voice, everything about you is loose. So this is really interesting.
The question there.
Right. She says, can benzos skew lie detectors? Polygraphs, right? So I don't know if Katie takes anything like this, but could that be possible? I can't answer that question. I would assume yes, but I'm not in that field. So
yeah, it's a good question. You might remember a case of missing 13-year-old Haley Dunn from Colorado City, Texas. And mother went on Nancy Gray's show. I think she did the show. This was when it was a national TV show. I think she was on either 11 or 13 times.
Whoa.
And she gave indication of guilt each and every time. And it became more contentious between her and Nancy Grace, but she kept going back. And so one of the things that the mother did, and there was a boyfriend involved, what the mother did was law enforcement wanted a polygraph. And I had a conversation with the Texas Rangers on this case. And I said, after the first appearance on Nancy Gray's show, I said, hey, the runaway girl is dead and mom is on TV working out her alibi. Mother, who was the driving force and the boyfriend was quiet in the background, mother insisted to the boyfriend, we'll take polygraph. We'll take it. And then they took benzos beforehand. And in pre-screening, wisely done by whether it was the Texas Rangers or Colorado police, I'm not sure, but whoever did that was wise enough to ask the question. And they said, no, we're not administering it to you today because it can bring a sedation. So they went back. Now they're on the hook to take it. They're both on the hook to take it. And they failed later on. But they would not give it to them under the influence. So yeah, it can impact the answer. It's a very good question, though.
That was a great question. And I'm just not convinced that people handling this case would point that out. That's an opinion based on what I've learned about, some of the law enforcement there. But
is it possible for law enforcement to have found Sebastian already and are waiting to build a good case? No, they wouldn't be able to. Illegal to conceal the body.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Remember when there's usually a battle, the Ramseys can accuse the Boulder police of ransoming the body, holding the body.
Right.
You can't do that legally, but my hope is, Liza, that they have information. I just don't know if it can ever be proven because if they never admit a fight took place, it's not going to change anything without Sebastian there to testify.
Right.
Why would Chris tell Katie to mute her phone as he called the sheriff, according to Katie? I haven't heard that yet, but it's consistent with control.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, do you think police, I mean, if Chris and Katie are not, let's say they're not, I mean, we discussed this a bit, but like Seth Rogers, he said, we're all suspects here until Sebastian is found. So no one's necessarily being cleared as a suspect, so to speak, but law enforcement has stated over and over, all the parents have been cooperative. Well, do you think they tested underneath Chris's fingernails? Do you think they tested under Katie's fingernails? I mean, just things that possibly, and I don't want to sound negative, but if they find Sebastian unalive, they find his body and, they're doing an autopsy and they're doing this testing. I mean, what are they going to have that would necessarily implicate Chris if he was responsible, if they didn't do any sort of testing on him?
I think they'd have to split them. And as far as I can tell, Chris is not allowed that, in the sense that, now she may have been interviewed separately, but if they didn't have initial suspicion,
Yeah.
and if they did interviews without that strong suspicion, without much of the language,
Yeah.
then there's going to be an element of embarrassment as they see him on the podcast on YouTube going off in anger and on the defense of Sasha. So, it's a tough call. The interview and investigation, the first interview begins with that emergency call. And I think that it should have been, okay, I'll get someone out there, an immediate call to the mother by herself.
Absolutely.
Immediate. Even if you believe he's just a runaway or problem child or whatever, you got to speak to them. You have to maintain a level of suspicion in order to clear. Now, we use statement analysis not simply to pick up deception, but we clear the innocent. We see the commitment in language, and we're able to push that off and get it done pretty quickly. And then get about the business of promotion. Usually it's may take a couple hours because you've got to get media there,
Right.
you got to get cameras someone can speak in front of, and then you start setting up every TV appearance possible.
Right.
And
Right.
it's going to take time. So I don't know that this was handled, how this was handled.
Yeah, and that's what's so concerning is, like, you of course want to trust law enforcement. Of course we want to trust them. I get a lot of heat because of the way I have come down on Tennessee law enforcement based on my experience with a certain case. However, all of these current cases, Riley Strain, these don't help. The handling of a lot of this, it doesn't really seem to help. So that's where my concern comes in, really.
Yep. And with the Solomon case, that 911 call has missing information. I wasn't able to pinpoint what it's about, but it's missing. There's
100%.
something is wrong.
So, I mean, 100%. But it just goes back to the fact that something is very wrong, and something is very wrong in the Solomon written statement as well, which your team so concisely went through. Yet somehow, to law enforcement, that was just a fatal crash. It just happened the way he said it happened. And after doing a lot more digging on that, even with fatal single car crashes, it takes weeks to complete an accident report, to get a reconstruction done, to go through all of this. None of that was done. Nothing. And hours later, it was completed. And the report was incomplete, I should say. No accident recon. So again, this is Sumner County. This is the exact same county that Sebastian went missing in. So I hate to trash it, so to speak. And I hate to speak poorly about law enforcement. I truly do. I live in New York. I love the NYPD here. And so it does bother me, but these are facts.
I believe that there is no shame in saying, let's reconduct interviews. Let's re-interview. Let's open this up again. Mm-hmm. We had a case, and I've described this before, of a man came home, and his girlfriend and his son, his girlfriend had committed suicide. She murder-suicide. She killed her son and then killed herself. And the boyfriend was cooperative, and he passed his polygraph. Years later, a cold case investigator who, over the years, became kind of a hero to a number of us for his ability to listen. He had asked during a training if I would listen to a 911 call of this case. And I said, when I get back to, this was down in Georgia, I said, when I get back to home in Maine, I'll do that. I'll take a look at it. And he's like, oh, could you do it now? And we were on break during a large seminar. And there was probably, I was guesstimating 500 years of law enforcement homicide experience in the large conference room.
Yeah.
So if 50 investigators have 10 years experience each, got a lot of experienced people. So he's like, oh, let's do it now. And I didn't want to do it, and the captain pushed a little bit, and this cold case investigator was handing out the transcript already, and everyone's taking a look at it, and I'm trying to get them back into the seminar, but I ended up having to do it. And there's a little bit of foolishness on my part in terms of the conclusion, but it was an emotional response. So I took them through this very short 911 call. And it just was against my will. I didn't want to do it. And Heather was there, and she publicly said, yeah, you should do it. Putting me on the spot. And the call began with, 2 people just killed themselves in my house. And what had happened was I hadn't seen the transcript or heard the call, but Heather did. And she saw that 2 people just killed themselves in my house. A, he was taking ownership of the house. B, he just blamed the child. 2 people. 7-year-old didn't kill himself. We went through it together, and unanimously in this very large gathering of law enforcement, of homicide investigators, of seasoned professionals, there was not a single dissent. And so I didn't know any details about the case. I hadn't seen the file. I didn't know about the polygraph.
Yeah.
And the captain had said at the end of it, you all, the entire class says this guy killed her. Peter, how sure are you? I dopily said, I'll stake my career on it, which is not wise.
But
so then they said, we can tell you now he passed his polygraph. He was fully cooperative. And the coroner agreed this was murder-suicide due to the forensics. And I said, no, he killed her. He killed her. He hated her, couldn't use her name, but after she's dead, he liked her. We saw the change. And it wasn't matching, the language wasn't matching with what was found in the investigation. It wasn't congruent. And I think this was like 2016 or so, 2015. And I was staying with the language only. And then when the crime scene photos were shown, and I don't really understand in terms of the blood spatter and that sort of thing. I'm just the nerdy guy with the language. When the truth came out, he did kill them. And he didn't own the house. He tried to get her girlfriend to sign the title deed over or put him on it. And when she refused, she basically signed her death certificate. And they said, well, the DA will not reopen the case unless the coroner changes his opinion to from murder-suicide to undetermined. So I sent him a copy of the analysis, and he graciously said, let's reopen it. And the DA said, okay, let's reopen it. The coroner's changed it to unknown.
What state was this?
Yeah, we got, I should say we, but this particular resolute investigator got the conviction.
What state, though?
Georgia.
And what county? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember. I can look it up.
I mean, don't you find that to be incredibly rare that a judge would sign off on, let's say, exhuming a body and then doing another autopsy? I feel like that would be incredibly rare.
The coroner looked at it and looked at the analysis and said, this weird guy from Maine, he's kind of making sense here, that sort of thing.
But that's what I mean. I'm like, kind of, my head is going in all these different directions, because it's like you essentially handed him a piece of paper about linguistics, and a judge is like, yep, let me send, it sounds crazy.
The cold case investigator that did all this work, very special man, he had the victim's mother after the conviction.
Okay.
The victim's mother came and said, you gave me my daughter back. People have been so cruel to me, saying, you raised a killer, you raised a killer. And she was, elderly, and he was very moved, and it's been something special that we've looked at. I used it for all the trainings. the in-person trainings, because it's really something that's very powerful.
It's
Yeah.
it's literally incredible. I mean, it's you essentially you save a mother's life here, and I mean, you save the you restore everything that this woman and her child really stood for in their lives when they, when they were alive, and that's just really important. So
Now, this particular investigator, he exists in police departments all over the country. They generally care much more than people realize. And the detractors within departments who would just rather cover their tracks and move on to the next case because they're so busy or whatever, they're rare.
yeah,
They're rare. This is what I found experientially.
I agree.
Most investigators, their curiosity never ends. They do read social media. They read opinions. They look for anything and everything they can. There's no shame in reopening a case. There's no shame in re-interviewing here, because you win more confidence of the public with that type of transparency.
Yes, instead of rushing them off. And I found that when law enforcement knows that they're correct on something, when they know they're right, they will prove you wrong immediately. Immediately, they will show you. And in the Solomon case, it's been the complete opposite. It's been basically like, go fly a kite. We're done with this here.
Yeah. And it happens, but it's more rare than what we're seeing. And so I'm trusting in some of the facts in this particular case, that there are the professionals behind the scenes that believe what most of us believe, especially after hearing that stepfather speak, and would like to prove what happened. Can't always do it, but I think they're trying.
Well, let's hope and pray, because this has gone on for way too long.
Yeah.
The circus also, I'm sorry, it's a circus. So
I appreciate you joining, Lauren, and I hope people follow your work on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Thank you.
Love to I've told Lauren this privately. I love to follow independent journalists. I think it's really our future in terms of getting truth out, whether we're accurate or not, but not deliberately burying cases, but bringing them to light. And it's so important.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And I love your work, and I look to you for so much, and I look up to you, and I'm sorry that I bug you all the time.
No bother.
Well,
thanks everybody for joining us. And we're still hoping for a good outcome, as difficult as it's getting. So thank you all.